Hey, 7th graders. How's it going? So we are starting chapter 4, which is our world of inequalities. If you think about it, we just finished studying equations. When you solve an equation, there is one right answer. So if you solve an equation, you might end up with a solution like x equals 2. That means that 2 is the solution to the equation. It is the number that makes the equation true, and it's the only solution. Today, and for the next few weeks, we're going to be studying inequalities. Instead of using an equal sign, inequalities use inequality signs, which are less than, greater than, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. All of a sudden, this means that your solution could be many numbers. If x, for example, has to be less than 7, that means that x could be anything less than 7. So could x be 6? Yes, because 6 is less than 7. So all of a sudden, instead of having one solution, you're going to have many. And if you remember from 6th grade, we can graph inequalities using a number line and then shading on the number line where the solution is. Let's take a look at a couple of inequalities together, just as we're reviewing in our minds what an inequality actually means. Have you ever been to an amusement park before, like Michigan's Adventure, or maybe even just like a carnival or the fair? Sometimes rides that you go on have height restrictions, meaning that you have to be a certain height to be allowed to go on the ride. This happens to my kids every time we go to Michigan's Adventure. Here's an example. Let's say that when you go to ride on a roller coaster, it says you must be at least 44 inches tall to ride the roller coaster. This is an example of a real world situation. You don't have to just be 44 inches tall. You have to be at least 44 inches tall. So instead of being an equation like x equals 44, it's an inequality now, because as long as you're 44 inches tall or taller, you can ride. So let's say I want to write an inequality to describe this situation. The first thing I want to do is pick a variable for the height. I could use h to stand for height, or some of us just prefer to use x because we use x every time. So in this case, I know that x and 44 are going to be related to each other. And then I'm looking at these words, at least, and I'm deciding what at least means. I'm deciding whether at least means less than, greater than, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. So in my mind, I'm thinking about how x is the height of the person. So can the person be taller or bigger height than 44? Yes, they can. Since x can be greater, right? Like if you're 50 inches tall, you're going to be allowed to ride. 50 is greater than 44. Can the person be 44 inches tall and ride the ride? At least means that yes, they could be 44 inches tall or taller. So I'm going to add an equal to sign here. This now says x, which stands for the height of the person, has to be greater than or equal to 44 inches. So if I'm thinking about numbers that could be solutions, 45 would work, 46 would work, 60 would work. I'm 63 inches tall, almost. So 63 inches would work. I could ride the ride because 63 is greater than or equal to 44. And now we're going to graph it on our number line to show the solutions. I'm going to label my number line with an X. And you're going to notice that the numbers aren't labeled yet. When you have to write and graph an inequality, my advice is to put your starting number in the middle of the number line. So somewhere around here, I'm going to make my number line 44. It's not okay to just label one number though. We have to get a sense for what else is here on our number line. Since this is a whole number, I'm just going to use counting numbers or whole numbers on my number line. That means I have 45, 46, 47, and 48. The numbers would keep going. That's what the arrow implies. And then this direction, right, it should be getting smaller because less than numbers are to the left on a number line. So if I'm sort of counting down, I have 43, 42, 41, and 40, and the arrow means that those numbers would continue. Reviewing what you learned in 6th grade, whatever your starting number is, you put a circle on it. You have to decide now if that circle is going to be called an open circle, just like that, or a closed circle. A closed circle means that the number is part of the solution. Can someone ride the ride if they're 44 inches tall? Yes. So I'm going to shade in the circle, we call this a closed circle, to show that 44 is part of the solution to this inequality. And then, greater than means I'm going to shade the numbers as they're getting greater or larger than 44. This is where the numbers get larger, so I'm shading to the right. To do that, I darken the number line, and then I darken the arrow. Why would I do that? I want to show that the answers or the solutions don't stop at 48 inches, they continue. 49, 50, 51, 52. As people get taller and taller, they can still ride the ride. So I darken the arrow, which shows that the solutions continue in that direction. Some shortcuts that might be helpful for you is that if you're using a greater than or a less than sign, those are going to be open circles because they're not going to include the number. But if you have greater than or less than, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to, those will be closed circles, like the one we just graphed, because it's included in the solution. And then since some of you love shortcuts, I'll remind you that the direction of the symbol points the way that you're going to shade. So since my greater than sign points to the right, I'm shading to the right. That shortcut only works if your variable comes first. And then sometimes I'm going to give you some words like a number is fewer than -1, and I'm going to ask you to write an inequality. Just like in chapter 3 when we were studying equations and expressions, a number is going to be represented by a variable because we don't know for sure what it is. So I'm going to use x. You can use any letter you want. X and -1 are the two major parts of my inequality. And now I have to decide what sign is going to go between them. I need a sign that means is fewer than. Fewer means less or smaller. So I'm going to start with a less than sign here. This currently says x is less than -1. And I'm going to ask how that compares to the words. A number is fewer than -1. If it has to be fewer than, can it be equal to? Is there anything in the words that tells me that it could actually equal -1? I don't think so. I think fewer than means less than. It can't actually equal -1. Could it equal -5? Sure. -5 is fewer than -1. -5 would be a solution. Would +5 be a solution to the inequality? No. 5 is not less than -1, so it would not be a solution. We're going to keep working on this in class, and we'll eventually be solving inequalities before we graph them and talk about them. But I really want you wrapping your mind around the less than, greater than language and how we can represent that on a number line.